morning or good afternoon or evening, depending on when you're joining us or where you're joining us from. I'm Jeff Greenbaum. I am the managing partner of Frankfurt Kernet, an advertising law practice in New York. I'm also the chairman of the Global Advertising Lawyers Alliance. But what I'm here for you today is as the head of the Public Policy Council for the International Advertising Association. And the IAA is doing a series of fireside chats over the last several years with various policymakers, stakeholders, and other thought leaders in the advertising industry to sort of explore certain issues related to kind of the advertising ecosystem. You know, the thing that this fireside chat is really about, this sort of series is about this whole notion of the ways in which advertising standards are developed, the way in which we come up with these types of policies, and the ways in which sort of collaboration between the industry, self-regulation, government works, and the ways in which collaboration can make rules more effective. At IAA, we really believe that the smartest regulation comes from this kind of open communication, this collaboration between all the various stakeholders, because we really believe that when people are talking to each other, when people are operating with fuller information, you come up with a regulatory environment that is, really both better for consumers and better for industry as well. So today I am joined in this fireside chat, this virtual fireside chat, and you can see our little fake fireplace. I think it's going to pop up with Manisha Kapoor, who is the CEO and Secretary General of the Advertising Standards Council of India. Now, for those of you who have been coming to these fireside chats for the last couple of years, you might say, wow, I've seen Manisha before. Aren't there other people in the advertising ecosystem to talk to? And yes, that is true. And but it is also true that there are kind of not a lot of places in the world that are doing as much as Manisha and Advertising Standards Council of India is. And one of the reasons that we're sort of getting together again is because of the groundbreaking work that ASCI is doing. And it felt like a good time to sort of revisit that work and have another conversation with Manisha again. In fact, I was just with Manisha recently in Mumbai for the International Council for Advertising Self-Regulation annual meeting, where ASCI received an award for its work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, recognizing ASCI's achievement in this area. So what I want to do is talk about the work that ASCI is doing in this area. But I think before we talk about the latest report, Manisha, I think it would be helpful if we sort of took a step back and sort of, if you gave people a little bit of perspective of some of the work that ASCI has been doing over the last several years about more progressive representations in advertising and sort of what brought us to this point today.
Yeah, sure. And lovely to be on the podcast, and always a pleasure chatting with you, Jeff. I think we started this journey really about 4 years ago to make advertising not just compliant, because compliant is really the minimum kind of standard, but how do we also make advertising more progressive and more responsible? And to that extent, D&I became one of the pillars of, taking that agenda ahead. From our point of view, there are really two objectives that we at ASCI have set ourselves to do to help the industry. One is to constantly build the business case and therefore establish why this is a good thing for advertisers to consider and to include in their brand programs. And the second thing is to equip them with the insights, knowledge, frameworks, and tools to be able to actually go on that journey. So, we've done a few studies in the past. We've worked with various experts and partners and research agencies. And we've really looked at women in the past. We've looked at inclusion from the point of view of other underrepresented groups, so whether it's the LGBTQI community, whether it's people with disabilities, older people. So we've really kind of looked at some of these challenges, in representation. And interestingly, we said, okay, let's look at what's happening with men, because, that's a large part of what we see in representation in advertising as well. And that led us through a very interesting journey, over the last 6 or 7 months that we've been working on this project. And we are very excited to share some of the findings of the report today with you.
Now, can you talk a little bit about how this sort of work in more progressive representation advertising fits into sort of the larger mission of self-regulation. I think, look, we've got an audience listening from all over the world, and self-regulation is conceived of very differently in different places. And just to take the U.S. as one example, right, the main self-regulatory system in the U.S., the National Advertising Division, is really just focused on truth in advertising. And although recently it updated its guidance to sort of dip a toe in the water of ways in which advertising could be misleading because of kind of stereotypes or something like that, it certainly isn't, we don't think of the advertising self-regulatory system in the US as one that is really addressing these issues in kind of a large way. So how do you conceive of it? How does it fit into the larger mission of what you're doing?
Yeah, I think different self-regulatory organizations, depending on the jurisdictional uh, realities of their countries, take on certain different mandates. In India, for example, misleading ads is certainly a very big part of what we do, but we actually look at objectionable advertising as a larger kind of thing, and misleading ads is certainly a big part of that. But we also look at advertising which may be vulgar, offensive, could be harmful. And we also look at advertisements that may not be fair in competition. So we look at a gamut of objections possible with the content of advertising. And like I said, misleading ads are definitely very big on our agenda, but so are some of these other kind of ads that we feel could perpetuate harm. And stereotypes is one of the kinds of harms that we look at when we look at advertising. Uh, so that's one in terms of just the kind of spaces that we look at. And I think the second thing that self-regulators help, and that's pretty much across the board, is we not only will give you a little rap on your knuckles when you get things wrong, but our mandate is also to support you get things right. And as part of that, various initiatives are present with different self-regulators. A lot of them work on copy advice, which is hopefully trying to make sure your ads don't have any obvious errors before they go on to publication, to reports, etc., that come out on advertising that may help advertisers create better ads. So there's a whole host of things that self-regulatory organizations do to support the advertising industry get it right. And some of these initiatives are part of that part of our work.
And do you find that the line drawing or the decision making is as straightforward when you're thinking about these types of issues versus truth in advertising? I mean, you look at a health claim and you say, look, you don't have proof for that claim, you can't make it. But, when you see an ad that may go against some other standards that relates more to offensiveness or taste or harm or something like that, how do you do the line drawing in a way that you feel like is going to be consistent and be accepted by people as sort of rational decision making?
That's an interesting question, and I think it's something that we think about a lot as well. I think again, most self-regulatory organizations have this concept of an independent jury. So it's not necessarily the self-regulatory organization that is taking a decision of a go no go on particular ads. Most self-regulatory organizations have an independent jury that has a lot of diversity in it. Again, the composition of the jury differs, from country to country. But in India, for example, we have what we call civil society present always in majority in any jury hearing. We try and make sure that the jury itself comes from very diverse backgrounds, and we believe when a bunch of people coming from diverse backgrounds are able to openly discuss and debate certain ads and the content that is there in these ads, in most cases we've seen that they actually come to a consensus. In India, for example, I would say that maybe 95% of our cases the jury is pretty unanimous, even though they may start with different positions, but through arguments, persuasion, putting forward different points of view, in most cases they are able to kind of align with a particular view on an ad, and that includes both industry and non-industry members of the jury. So I think there is definitely some robustness to the system. Um, and I mean, I agree with you that things like, what could be offensive, etc., is also very personal. And, but I think, with hopefully a very diverse jury, we are able to place different points of view and perspectives. And, collectively, the jury is able to take a call on some of these.
And, one of the things that is so interesting to me about the work that you've done and some of the other work that others have done. I think I remember we were at the UN for the Unstereotype Alliance conference, but maybe it was a year or two ago, and hearing some other presentations on, I think, age-related representations and things like that. And one of the things that the case that you've really made is it's not just about that this is better or this is not going to cause harm or this is the right thing to do, but that there's this really strong business case for more progressive representations as well. And you've really seen that across the studies. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you've learned about that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, the business case for representation we've seen globally is very strong. And in India, in fact, the numbers are even stronger. And if I were a brand manager, I mean, I would really jump at diversity as a way to make my advertising stand out and relate better with consumers. We found that, just short-term sales and long-term brand equity both get positively impacted by representations that are more diverse and more something that consumers can actually relate to, and therefore they feel that people like us are represented in advertising. And we've seen that those scores are as high as 30% swing. So I mean, that's a massive jump. If, like I said, if I were a brand manager, I would kind of want to go on that journey, just for the benefit of my brand and the way that it relates to consumers. So there is a lot of work which the Unstereotype Alliance has done, that some of their global research partners like Kantar, they put out these studies, quite frequently. And they clearly show a very strong business case to have advertising that represents the diversity of the audiences of these brands.
So talking about Unstereotype Alliance, one of the things that it seems like you've really done at ASCI is you're not going it alone, right? You've done all these reports with partnerships with other organizations like Unstereotype Alliance. You've got tremendous support from corporations, sort of global corporations, whether in India or just based other globally, and this sort of speaks to this whole model of of collaboration and this idea of really bringing people together to think through these problems together. And so I would love to hear a little bit about how did you get these organizations involved in these projects? How do you get them excited to do it? How do they go down this road, and what role do they play in sort of helping to think these issues through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are so many organizations that are interested in this agenda. And this is a way to kind of bring multiple perspectives together. I think there are so many organizations that have really the long term thinking and the vision to know that, if the industry goes in this direction, it's good for advertising. It's good for the reputation of advertising as well. It's good for how consumers relate and trust advertising. And I think we have been lucky in that sense to find partners who are who are very supportive of this agenda. So we have resources. A lot of them have freely shared some of their internal studies with us, that just to bring us up to speed in terms of some of the work that they have done, so we can build on top of it. We, of course, then work with also domain experts, because we are not domain experts on diversity. I mean, we look at advertising, but diversity is not a domain expertise for us. So bodies like the Unstereotype Alliance, some of our research partners who have done work in these areas before, I think the idea really is to bring out studies that build on past work, that can kind of push our inquiries a bit further. And this whole kind of ecosystem works very well, because then when it also comes to the dissemination and the amplification of this work, we are able to find partners that are interested in it, that are, then they start to use it in their own teams. And that's how, the cascade happens. So it's whether it's large organizations, small organizations, domain experts, research partners. I think we are very clear that we want to work in collaborative ways in which we can maximize the impact of the work that we are doing.
So your latest report, which is what brought us here today, is called Manifest. Masculinities Behind the Mask. And which I want to talk about, but do you want to talk for a second? I mean, the report, and if you can, anyone who's watching, you can Google it, and it's easy to find, and it pops right up. But it's got this it's beautifully illustrated. Do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of the design and what was going on there?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things that, personally, I mean, I love about the work that we do at ASCI, and I think it's become a little bit of a passion project for all of us, is to just have beautifully designed reports. And what we do at regulation is not always interesting to everyone. It can be. I mean, now being in regulation, I think it's a fascinating subject. But when I read it from the outside, and if I remember the days when I was a brand manager, I mean, regulation really seemed very dry, and not my work. And I'm just happy to pass it on to someone in the legal team who's used to reading long passages and papers. But if I think we want to land our work in the midst of creative in the midst of the creative process, I think we need to present it in a way that invites people in to read it. And therefore, we've over the last 3 or 4 reports, been very conscious of the fact that we would like beautiful illustrations, that we would like it to look good and look like a piece of work that you would want to browse through and that draws you in. So I think that's a very conscious decision we've taken. So we've had artists in the past, and again, an artist, look at a very interesting illustration from a dance form in India, which, comes from Kerala. The dance form is called Kathakali, which actually means storytelling. And most of the characters in this dance form are played by men. And they put on a very elaborate mask, but they play all sorts of different characters, including women characters. And we felt it was a very interesting way in which we could talk about our report as well. So yeah, so thank you for noticing that, and it's something that we put a lot of effort in.
So you mentioned the research, and it seems to me that one of the reasons that the report is so compelling is it's not just, I don't know, you're giving some opinions about it, but it's really rooted in a tremendous amount of kind of academic and scientific research. Can you talk a little bit about kind of almost what happened before, what the research, sort of what the research that you collected was, and sort of some of the important things that drove you to that led you to sort of build this report based on that?
Yeah, I think one of the fundamentals that we believe in, and it perhaps comes from my own training in brand and marketing, is that advertising, you cannot look at advertising representations in isolation. I mean, they come from a much larger context of what's happening in society. And to understand what's happening in advertising or representations in media, we need to understand what are some of the underlying cultural and societal changes, shifts, and impulses. And which is why, when we do a large study and on something so fundamental as gender and gender roles and representations, it really comes from how we are as a society. And without studying that, if we study only advertising, we feel that it does not necessarily give us the depth of insights. We will get a few observations, but it doesn't allow us to explain some of the phenomena that we are seeing. And which is why, even for our earlier report that we did on women and the one that we have now done on men, we really went with research partners who are experts in cultural reading and insights. And, then you kind of, in that context, read advertising or media or brands. And that, I think, allows us to add a lot of depth to our work. The insights feel more meaningful and true. They feel that they are very familiar, yet, articulated in a way that, leads us to some new ways of thinking and imagining how our brands could do. And therefore, this has always been our approach in the work that we do on thought leadership, and particularly on inclusion. It is a societal issue. It's not just an advertising issue. And advertising draws from what's happening in society, draws from the larger media space and what's happening there. It does not exist in isolation. So we've always kind of gone with that approach of looking at what does the existing research say, what are the academic papers saying on this. We look at podcasts, we look at blogs, we are looking at people as phenomena, looking at their social media feeds. What are some of the how are they commenting on some of these issues? So it's really a lot about social listening, and really trying to unpeel some of the layers beneath which we find very, very rich insights.
So it seems like one of the core insights, or, the report really kicks off with this notion of that we are in a masculinity crisis. Can you talk about what is the masculinity crisis?
Yeah, so there seem to be several factors again that contribute to what we feel is a crisis in masculinity, or at least a flux. I mean, depending on where you are, and in terms of your class and other kind of privileges, but there is we can recognize that there are some forces. So there is the whole changing context of society, and it's almost like a poly crisis. There are several sets of factors that are impacting this. If we look at just the word man and its meaning in society today, it's not just a gender. I mean, we are using the term man almost as a bad prefix to various things, right? We say mansplaining, we say mansplaining, all of these things, it all kind of becomes something where there is almost a problem, a branding problem with the word man, where it's now used by default to define negative experiences. Um, Whereas that, as everyone knows, is not the only truth, but it seems to become something which is a dominant part of cultural and popular narrative now. Uh, we know that patriarchy is being dismantled in various ways. I mean, it could be in various stages of being dismantled, but in various ways it is being dismantled across the world. Now, traditionally, men have drawn their identity and sense of purpose and what role they play in society through that construct. And when that starts to get dismantled, we are not very sure what's replacing it. And therefore, where are men drawing their sense of identity, purpose, role in society from? So that's another kind of force that's playing on things. Um, Men are also seeming to get caught between two very different kind of narratives. So one is the feminism, and the narrative that feminism has now been building over many years, which talks of equality, which talks of sharing of power, those kind of narratives. And on the other hand, you have the manosphere, which is responding to some of this with very, very hyper masculinity kind of narratives. And the challenge I think that we have looked at is that men seem to feel that they are caught between these two narratives. And so the feminism narrative uh, shows them a way to progress together, but perhaps does not give them as much meaning and purpose. Whereas the manosphere tends to give them a lot of meaning and purpose, and kind of is very strong about articulating what their role in society is, but promotes a narrative that eventually is harmful for society and its progress. And therefore, you're also seeing almost a polarization. And we've seen this in many parts of the world, when it comes to these issues, when it comes to political rights, when it comes to human issues, there's a lot of polarization that's happening. And the question is, how do we help men navigate this time of flux, this time of some bit of uncertainty, where your traditional structures have either going away, or you're even feeling caught in the traditional structures, because the traditional structures gave men a lot of purpose and a specific role, but it really took away all individuality from them. I mean, it gave them the privilege if they were able to become providers and protectors and did everything, and you towed the line, and then you were given the privilege. And again, it had very little space for individuality. And so men are also feeling today, increasingly we find in the reading that we did, that they're also feeling caught with patriarchy. So really, where do they go from here? How do they navigate this time? I think was really, what we were trying to uncover. I can't say for certain that, and I'm sure, this is not the only study which will tell men how it can be done, or tell brands and advertisers how it can be done. But the idea is to start this conversation, is to add to the conversation, and hopefully contribute in a way that is progressive, both for men and for society.
So there's a quote from the study, which I thought sort of crystallized this for me a little bit. It said that the study aims to develop an empathetic understanding of the current state of masculinity, recognizing men as both villains and victims, heroes and those in need of support, and apex providers and individuals who also require care. Right? It's that sort of that. It's sort of the the yin and the yang, the black and the white. Like it's both of these things at the same time. And what you're seeing is, so you're seeing that these men are not only feeling conflicting messages about a masculinity, but they're receiving those conflicting messages as well from the media, right? And I guess you also talked about how this played out in particular for Indian men in sort of different ways. Maybe, I mean, I think we've been talking about this from a very, very global perspective, but I think it's also really interesting to hear a little bit about the ways in which this was particularly, the ways in which this played out for Indian men too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the challenge really is very acute in societies like India, and could be in some other markets as well. I would say where perhaps in other Asian markets, etc. But where the birth but particularly in India, I think the birth of a male child, even till today, Jeffrey, is celebrated. And you see, even in the educated classes, you will see the male female birth ratio actually very adverse for females, whereas the natural, I mean, where there is no discrimination, you find that, you have a higher female to male birth ratio. In India, you don't find that, even in the highest educated sections of society. So there is a huge premium, for men when they're born, for a male child. But with that, of course, comes the whole burden of, therefore, what this child is supposed to deliver in life, right? I mean, so this child should not do any wrong, needs to be the way in which generational wealth, wisdom, everything kind of passes on, is supposed to, is therefore this almost this kind of patriarchal compact where you're going to get huge privileges. But here, these are the 5 things that you need to do, okay? That you have to be the protector and the breadwinner of the house. There is no going away from that. Even today in modern India, where women are working in households, it's very uncomfortable for men if the women are earning a little bit more than them. I mean, they cannot stop working even if the woman is working. So there is almost like discomfort to discover in a conversation if a man does not hold a job right now, and even though he may not need the money, but it's just culturally uncomfortable, and because that's really the expectation, that you are going to be a lifelong breadwinner and provider for your family. uh, Men are expected to really leapfrog social strata for their families, okay, which means there's pressure on the kind of jobs you get. And again, in a market like India, where we have a huge population and the jobs are not as many, especially stable jobs and government jobs, which are very highly coveted. For every seat you have a million applicants. That pressure is immense to be successful. There is no room for personal choice. This is what we were discussing earlier, that it's only socially approved pathways of what you can become, what you can do, where you can move to, how you can behave. All of those are issues. And therefore, there is a very high standard that men must meet if they are to be called successful in society today. And that obviously puts a lot of pressure. With all of this, there is also the feminist movement, right? Where women are now more outgoing, more independent. There's technology which has come in, which is making some of the roles that traditionally were men when it comes to things like strength, etc., are now being democratized. So there is, in a sense, a very high pressure building up where men are also being very critical of themselves if they are not able to meet those standards. And they are seeing that power go away, some of it to women, some of it, a lot of it to privilege as well. So if you belong to the privileged class, things are okay. I mean, whether you're a man or a woman, in some way you are, you can still navigate reasonably well through life. But the moment you move out of a very highly privileged class, the challenges are real, and where men feel that these opportunities are being taken away from them. And therefore, the issue also becomes that, therefore, there is a structural compact or a structural framework in which masculinity is seen in India. It is not really for each man to decide, okay, let me move away from this, but you are kind of caught in the expectations of society to be certain things, and therefore have very little room to maneuver yourself. And like we said, the messages seem to be conflicting. There don't seem to be very, very clear role models that are emerging. We are seeing some change, so it's not doomsday, and it's not that everything's bad. But yes, it is complex, and it is taking some time, I think, for men to come to terms with it, for enough people to stand up as role models, and for us to see progress on these criteria.
So we've got this masculinity crisis. We've got sort of these conflicting messages about who men are, who men are supposed to be, how they fit into society, what's respected, what's not respected. And then the report really then looks at how that's reflected in advertising and the media. So what did you learn about how this sort of masculinity crisis, or this evolution of what it means to be a man, how that's playing out in advertising messages?
Yeah, so it's very interesting, because what seems to be happening in advertising is that there is a kind of man which is written for a woman audience, and then there is a kind of man that is being written for a male audience, and that's kind of pulling apart a little bit. So in ads that are typically directed to women, or sometimes even written by women, we find that there is much more of the feminism kind of narrative, where men and women are doing things together. But those ads don't necessarily show men as having a very specific role or a purpose. And some of the other advertising that we are seeing, where which is typically aimed at men, also tends to reinforce very standardized notions of what it means to be successful, what it means to be ambitious. There is a certain imagery of highly successful, privileged kind of men that's coming through. So those are some of the issues that we are seeing. And again, there will always be a few ads, but the mainstream advertising is not showing enough images and representations that men can take inspiration from. There is some opening up. It's coming more through a little bit of cinema and things like web series, etc. In advertising, it still seems to be not highly polarized, because usually brands don't get into those territories. But we are seeing, hopefully, some inspirations coming from the world of cinema and the whole web series kind of content, which is now a little bit more diverse than it was.
And what would, when you see sort of this sort of different types of portrayals, or more progressive, say, portrayals of men in advertising, is the driver the target audience? Is the driver the team who's creating the advertising? Is the driver corporate culture? Is the product category? Like, what were some of the ways in which you saw, change happening?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of all of these things. It's also, I think, for brands that are truly invested in understanding where their audiences are, right? Again, I always feel that brands who are just trying to understand how to advertise, get slightly a more shallow understanding, whereas brands who are really committed to their audiences and the movements in society that they're tracking will probably be the first ones to get, what's really happening with men. And again, like I said, we are already starting to see some of that in media content, not so much in advertising, but in media content, we are starting to see it. And therefore, it opens up opportunities where, let's say, you see a certain kind of content being extremely successful in cinema, or or on these TV series, and then you say, okay, is there something happening there? Why are people relating to these kind of characters? And that thinking hopefully will percolate down to advertising, and we will start to see more of these changes. I think it also takes, I would say, in any kind of non-stereotypical representation, a very specific intent to be so, because the defaults are just so easy to fall into, right? I mean, it requires, that there's a formula that works in a certain way, and everyone's comfortable with that formula. So it really takes, I think, very intentional efforts to say that no, we are going to look at a certain diversity in this, or why is this kind of narrative catching the attention of people. And I think it needs that conscious kind of effort to start to move your advertising in a direction. And then it's always right, the early adopters who will need to take that extra effort. And then once people see enough of that, then that becomes the new formula sometimes.
So it
So
might be useful as we just to hear, like, could you give us an example of two of what would you consider to be a traditional representation of men in advertising?
yeah, so for example, typically you would see in advertising of, let's say, even jewelry brands. I mean, you'll always see the man buying something for the lady. So he's still in that providership kind of role. Or we've seen, in fact, when we were doing our studies on, when we were looking at ads through the lens of women, we found that in automobile ads, for example, that even if the woman was shown in the ad, I mean, she was really, breaking the coconut to start the new car, or she was always sitting in the passenger seat and not in the driver's seat. So you do see some of these stereotypes being, reinforced. And I just feel it's sometimes it's just because that's what we've always seen. We are not even thinking about it, and advertisers are not thinking about it, and creative agencies are not thinking about it. And it really needs someone who has come from a different experience to be able to speak up, to say that but this is what's happening in the market, or this is what's happening in society, and how are we representing that change in our advertising. And again, like I said,
Well, we lost you there. We lost you. You cut out. Are you back?
yes, sorry, did you lose me? Okay, I think we are waiting for Jeffrey to join back. Yeah. So I'll just continue. I guess there might be a few people watching. We'll just wait for Jeffrey to join back. And, we were really talking about how the advertising industry itself and the different players need to be able to bring in a certain bit of diversity in their teams through their experiences, and also uh, kind of take on that very specific mandate of saying that this is a very intentional space we wish to operate in, and learn enough about that, and
Oh,
work through. Oh, hi,
I'm back.
Jeffrey, you're back. Hi.
So,
Yeah.
so just I'm now nervous about the connection. I don't know what's going on. So, you gave an example of some sort of traditional representations, right? The man buying the jewelry, like, I don't know, the buying the car situation. Can you give an example or two of, like, what would be a more progressive representation of masculinity in advertising that you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we have seen some ads that, let's say, are not worried about failure, or are showing success in ways that are not traditional, right? Of people charting their own path to, protect the individuality that they have in terms of certain careers. Or, I remember a very interesting Nescafe ad a few years back that showed a man who had a stammering problem. And, but he became a stand up comedian. And his take on it was that, I mean, he built, in a sense, what was seen as something which would not get you success in the traditional masculinity world, but he kind of built that into the way that he was, and he owned that, and became successful as a stand-up comedian. So there are a few ads. We've also seen ads, for example, in personal care, that are exploring this aspect of men taking care of themselves, which is not necessarily part of the traditional makeup of masculinity in India, where men were supposed to be this rough and tough, and not really bothered about how they looked or how they saw themselves. And so some of those kind of ads are expanding, I think, the box in which masculinity finds itself. So you're not kind of breaking away and doing something dramatically different, but you are, through all these ads, really giving yourself a little bit more space, a little bit more room to explore different dimensions, um, So I think those are some of the things that advertising can do. We are seeing some of the challenges, that masculinity faces. So whether it's about some, the crisis of loneliness that men face, and that a lot of people have spoken about, the fact that you sometimes cannot share your deepest secrets with your closest partner, when like we had someone say that when I have a great day, I can share it with my wife, but when I have a really lousy day, I find it difficult to share with her. Can we show representations like that in advertising? I mean, these are some great, very small examples, and that that men would relate to, that women would relate to. And it's, in a sense, it's a great thing, right, to be able to share your deepest feelings with your life partner or with your close friends. So those are pathways, I think, for both men and society to kind of move in a positive direction. So there are a few of those that the report talks about. And so I think those are the ways in which that box needs to be expanded a little bit.
On that note, what, maybe you could just talk about what are some of the sort of key takeaways, recommendations from the report.
Yeah. So one is, I think, is to acknowledge the crisis within masculinity, and how do you kind of build from there into your brands. The report speaks of a few opportunities for brands to leverage. Uh, can we how do for example, the way that we handle success and ambition in advertising. We There is a huge premium placed on success, but can failure be normalized? Because I mean, failure is you know the big thing that everyone faces in life. It's so how do you normalize failure? How do you, let's say, can you show men accepting failure and still being in that sense happy? So that could be one kind of way to look at. How do we look at alternative individual pathways for men rather than just what society set out for them? So how do we showcase some of those? Um, how can we acknowledge that while the provider mindset is very dominant, and something that men find very valuable as well, but what's the pressure it's putting on men? What is the expectations that are rising? Can we kind of talk about some of those issues? Can we understand some of the insecurities perhaps that men are facing on account of changes in society, on account of the dismantling of patriarchy? So those are again some interesting things that men can, and advertising can look at. Uh, Also things like, can we show iconic men but who are publicly open about some of their struggles, and therefore that kind of normalizes it for everyone else. So so those could be some of the aspects that we look at. uh, we look at also a more textured and empathetic approach to vulnerability. How do we showcase some of that? And again, it's not to do it in a very binary kind of way, but how do we start to build the texture in advertising on some of these issues? Can we unlock safe spaces for men to learn, unlearn, share? And so I think these are the kind of depictions that men themselves are looking for. I mean, those are the complexities they're navigating with and don't feel comfortable because there isn't enough happening around them, which shows them how they can do that. And advertising really could come in and work on some of these narratives, which I think would be very powerful for their target audiences and for society. And these are some great spaces which have not been explored yet in advertising. And I mean, the whole idea of advertising is to do something which is innovative, something that's new, something that looks fresh. And there's a whole host of ideas in the report. Like I said, if I were a brand manager, I would be jumping on some of these findings and insights.
And so the report's been out for a little while now. What's the response been?
Oh, it's been great. We are, hearing from a lot of people. We've been invited to a few forums to talk about the report. We are talking to a few advertisers to do some workshops where we could present these findings in greater detail and, engage in a conversation with them. So I think it is opening up, a few opportunities to, as I said, continue these conversations to discuss this. And hopefully we'll start to see advertisers then really internalize some of this, build that into their processes, build that into their creative teams, have conversations around this. I think what we are just asking for them is that, when you are conceptualizing an ad, These are some insights that you can draw upon. Discuss some of these as you're forming your ads, and hopefully you'll have a much better ad.
Thanks, Manisha. This was really interesting. It's a great report.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jeff.
All right. Thanks for doing this, and everybody, thanks for joining us. Maybe we'll be back with Manisha next year for the next project, and we'll be excited to see what that is.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Take care.
Right. Bye-bye.
Bye.